on this one as well. So losing altitude on that one. Back to you.
Nicole Penalese, thank you very much. Appreciate it. With more reaction now to Larry Kudlow being tapped as a top economic advisor, Washington Examiner White House reporter Gabby Giffords is with us, along with National Taxpayer Union Senior Fellow for Fiscal Policy, Mattie Duppler. Mattie, let me start with you. Larry Kudlow is a free trade kind of guy. He didn't like the tariffs initially, but looks like he warmed up a little bit, at least with them being a negotiating tool. Is he the right fit, do you think, knowing the way President Trump now operates after 1 year in office?
Right. I think it's very encouraging to see Kudlow's name appear as the next for this position. There was a deep bench. Shahir Knight, of course, very strong advocate for tax reform. Larry Kudlow as well, though. So you have an ally in the White House now who not only has been rock solid on pro-growth tax policy, but also is someone who's been an avowed free trader and has decades on the record of doing so. So moving forward, as we talk about what happens next with trade policy, having someone in the president's ear who has a long history being an advocate for free trade, I think we will see movement towards policy that protects American workers but allows us to be a competitive country in the global marketplace.
Of course, Gabby, he presumably will be taking the job as we're on the verge of really being tough with China. Let's not forget that Robert Lighthizer suggested $30 billion in tariffs. President Trump says apparently $60 billion. He's not messing around.
No, Larry Kudlow is obviously an avowed free trader and opposed these steel and aluminum tariffs at the get-go, but he's also been very harsh on China and has encouraged the administration to take a hard line in order to contain this trade deficit or at least reduce it in some cases. You know, he's pushed the president to consider tariffs that would curb back this deficit, that would address China's intellectual property theft, that would address their trade abuses. This is something that Larry Kudlow and the president seem to agree on. And the areas where they differ are actually areas where the president said yesterday he welcomes divergent opinions. He wants somebody who's going to be a counterweight in some instances, somebody who's going to push back and offer a different perspective, and I think somebody also who he respects, and that's somebody like Larry Kudlow. He didn't really have that relationship with Gary Cohn. There was a lot of tension there in the past few months, so I think that's one of the reasons why this selection ultimately was made.
And Mattie, I think also to that point, with Rex Tillerson, I guess after being the CEO of the most powerful corporation in the world for so long, didn't feel like a team player. I mean, it's good to have and say, listen, boss, I don't like this, I don't like that. But when he calls the play and you're in a huddle, you run the play. I mean, he never seemed to get behind President Trump, even publicly. And that sort of had to shake the president somewhat.
You know, it probably did, but looking at all of the headlines that have been written about the palace intrigue with this White House, those will come and go. They come and go with every White House. What we have now is a legacy that will be built on some of the policies that have been enacted by this administration, which will long outlive the administration. Long after Donald Trump returns to the private business that he was running before the White House, we will be seeing the benefits of tax reform. We will hopefully be seeing the benefits of positive trade policy, especially now with Larry Kudlow in the president's ear. And so I look forward to continuing to discuss and see benefits for average Americans from the tax reform plan that will continue in the next coming decades, rather than talking about personnel changes at the White House.
Well, speaking of tax policy, there's a big question now whether we could be on the verge of the second tax reform coming. Congressman Kevin Brady with an update this morning. Let's take a listen.
When we'll get some concrete proposals out there to discuss.
Yes, so the answer is this year. So the focus will be on doing what we set out to do, which is grow jobs, raise paychecks, and bring jobs back from overseas. That's always going to be our top priority. As far as fine-tuning and making corrections, that's routine in a tax reform of this size. And so right now we're listening to stakeholders, local businesses, and others about some of the fine-tuning they'd like to see done.
All right, Gabby, so what do you make of it? You know, listen, I think that the tax laws have spoken for themselves, to Mattie's point, and they're resounding. No one believes they're crumbs. Maybe part two of phase two could be sold right now.
Well, I think a lot of Americans are hoping that Republicans will make these individual tax cuts permanent, and that seems to be what Kevin Brady is talking about doing, and also eliminating some of the loopholes that were left behind from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. There are some questions about revenue if they choose to advance a second phase to this tax reform proposal, and I'm curious to see how that would be addressed.
Right.
But look, I mean, to Mattie's point earlier, there is sort of an economic cushion with the tax reform bill and the popularity that it's gained since getting through Congress, but there's also a lot of chaos going on inside the White House and a lot of staff departures that really overshadow a lot of the benefits that we're seeing on the economic side.
We should point
so
out, Gabby, I want to point out also, and you just reminded me that our budget deficit was significantly higher than anticipated. It was just announced earlier this week. And I want to ask you quickly, since you have your ears in D.C., any possibility then of a second go at this would see the removal of tax breaks for the fat cats out there that was promised to Main Street America?
I think it would be really difficult at this point for congressional Republicans to put that on the table, knowing that they're going to need bipartisan support for something like this.
Mattie, where do we go from here then with respect to perhaps more fine-tuning of the tax cuts?
Listen, there's a lot of runway left with the benefits that are going to come from tax reform. We've just seen withholding tables change, so Americans are seeing more in their paycheck. But now we're going to see the business changes in the tax code start to take effect. Businesses that have had money overseas that haven't been able to bring it back will start investing in America. We will see wages rise as a result, and we'll see more economic growth. So some of those deficit concerns, because we'll see economic growth, will be alleviated, and they will provide the template for members of Congress moving forward who want to be able to take another stab at reform. They've got their template now of why pro-growth reform is so important. They need to get out of the way, not let all of these dramatics in the White House take too much attention away from the fact that the tax reform bill is working and the economy will continue to improve.
All right, we'll see the magic of supply side going to work there. Ladies, thank you both very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, Republicans want to quickly move on Mike Pompeo and Gina Haspel's confirmation to